As I was cleaning my new boss's house, she looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You know our last maid died right where you're standing." I turned around so fast I almost shattered the antique vase I was dusting. "What did you just say?" "Yes, she collapsed while dusting the credenza. The police originally thought she was poisoned, but they never found a motive for anyone, so it must have just been one of those things." She shrugged and swished her way out of the room, leaving me stunned with my dish rag in my hand. I stood there for a full minute trying to decide if I should just walk out the front door and never come back. The problem was I needed this job more than I needed my next breath. My landlord had already slipped an eviction notice under my door 3 days ago, and my bank account was so empty it might as well have been a black hole. This mansion gig paid 3 times what my last cleaning job offered, and my new boss had promised me cash at the end of every week. I couldn't afford to be scared of ghost stories about dead maids. I turned back to the credenza and kept dusting, trying to ignore the exact spot where someone had apparently dropped dead. The wood felt cold under my fingers, even though the house was stuffy and warm. I moved to the next room, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that seemed to lean inward like they were trying to whisper secrets. Every book looked ancient and leather-bound, the kind of volumes that probably cost more than my entire yearly salary. I noticed that several of them were about poisons and toxicology, which seemed like a weird coincidence given what my boss had just told me. One title in particular caught my eye because it was pulled slightly forward from the others: The Art of Undetectable Poisons, a historical perspective. My stomach lurched. I pulled it out with shaking hands and found a bookmark stuck between the pages, marking a chapter called Symptoms of Slow-Acting Toxins. The bookmark looked fresh and new, like someone had been reading this recently. I kept moving through the house because standing still felt worse than keeping busy. The kitchen was pristine and white, almost surgical in its cleanliness. I opened the refrigerator to wipe down the shelves and found it stocked with dozens of identical glass bottles filled with some kind of green juice. There must have been 40 of them lined up in perfect rows. A small label on each one read Daily Tonic in elegant script. I remembered my boss mentioning that she'd leave me a drink in the fridge if I got thirsty, and my mouth went dry thinking about whether she meant one of these bottles. The bottles seemed to glow slightly in the refrigerator light, which I knew was just my imagination working overtime, but I slammed the door shut anyway. That's when I started feeling strange. My head felt light and fuzzy around the edges like someone had wrapped my brain in cotton. I gripped the counter to steady myself and tried to take deep breaths, but the air in the kitchen tasted metallic and wrong. Was this how the last maid felt right before she collapsed? I stumbled back toward the library, thinking maybe I just needed to sit down for a second, but my legs felt disconnected from my body. The house suddenly seemed darker even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. Every shadow looked like it was reaching toward me with long fingers. I tried to remember if I'd touched anything unusual or breathed in something I shouldn't have, but my thoughts were getting slower and harder to hold on to. The doorbell rang and I nearly screamed. I made my way to the front door on shaky legs, and when I pulled it open, a man in a gray uniform stood there with a toolbox. "Here to fix the air conditioning," he announced. "Your boss called about a broken unit." Relief flooded through me so intensely I almost cried. Another person, a normal person doing a normal job, which meant I wasn't alone in this creepy house with my increasingly creepy boss. "Thank God you're here," I managed to say. "The house is so stuffy I can barely breathe." He stepped inside and looked around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Yeah, I can fix that," he said slowly. "Where's the owner?" I told him she was somewhere upstairs, and he nodded but didn't move toward the stairs or ask me where the AC unit was located. Instead, he just stood in the foyer, staring at me with unsettling intensity. "You're the new maid," he said, and it wasn't a question. I was wondering when she'd find a replacement. The way he said replacement made my skin crawl. He set down his toolbox with a heavy thud that echoed through the marble entryway. "How long have you been working here?" His voice had changed somehow, become lower and more intimate. I took a step backward and felt the wall against my spine. "This is my first day," I whispered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what the last one said too." My blood turned to ice as he tilted his head and studied me like I was some kind of specimen. "I was here that day, you know." His smile widened into something horrible. "The day she died." Full story on the channel below.